Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show today. The topic, Jacob Compton and the Masonic Men of Majesty, the Masonic Lodge in the Old Eighth Ward, 1850 to 1914. We're going to have a wide and free-ranging conversation about such topics as Freemasonry, African-American history and culture, Harrisburg's Old Eighth Ward, and life in the late 19th century right here in the state's capital, with particular focus on Mr. Jacob Compton. All of this is inspired by the Commonwealth Monument Project, which is an extraordinary new addition to the streetscape here in Harrisburg. We're not far from it right now in our studio here on Walnut Street, but right on the Capitol complex is an amazing new monument dedicated to the memory of 4 significant African Americans and who participated and took part in a section of Harrisburg called the Old Eighth Ward. We're going to talk about all of this, and we're joined today by our first guest, who is Mr. Lenwood Sloan, who I like to describe as really the force to be reckoned with behind getting this monument done and built and erected. Lenwood, you were a tireless advocate for it. It now stands and will stand the test of time as a true monument to Harrisburg's history. Let's start though by letting the public know a little bit more about the monument and what it represents.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This year, I can't say this year anymore. 2020 was simultaneously the 150th anniversary of the passage of the 15th Amendment, which gave African American men the right to vote. In Pennsylvania, it actually restored their right to vote because they had voted in 1838. And it was also the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which extended the franchise to women in 1920. Between 1870 with the 15th Amendment and 1920 was the Jim Crow era. So the monument is entitled A Gathering at the Crossroads. And it's an allegorical gathering of 4 abolitionists and suffragists speaking about the 15th Amendment on a corner which we know historically Frederick Douglass had spoken on. It was Tanner's Alley, the gateway to the Old Eighth Ward. Tanner's Alley was also a site on the Underground Railroad. So we've chosen 4th and Walnut Street, that historic site, to recreate a kind of allegorical conversation on the value of the vote. We transformed the South Lawn of the Capitol to the Irvis Equality Circle, honoring K. Leroy Irvis, the first African-American Speaker of the House. On the Irvis Circle, we placed a pedestal, an ornate and iconic pedestal, honoring and commemorating the neighborhood that once stood there, and placed 100 names upon that pedestal, representative of the 1,100 African-American families who lived there before the neighborhood was taken through eminent domain to build the Capitol Park. And around that pedestal, we've placed the full life-size bronze figures of Thomas Morris Chester, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, William Howard Day, and Jacob T. Compton. Now, Jacob T. Compton is a really incredible gentleman. He goes down in history as a carriage driver, but we wanted to honor him because of the incredible diversity of his leadership in the Old Eighth Ward. And this program today is about Jacob Compton, who was a member of the Prince Hall Masons, and about the 27 names on the pedestal who were also Masonic Men of Majesty.
Thank you, Lenwood. And let's turn now to Mr. Kelly Summerford, who was a part of the Commonwealth Monument Project, a historical reenactor. And Kelly, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about Jacob Compton. Who exactly was he, and why should people remember him?
The first thing that comes to mind is unsung heroes. one who does great deeds but receive little or no recognition for them. I can only give you a snapshot of who Jacob Compton was. And we know Jacob Compton was born a free man August 3rd, 1837 in Williamsport, Maryland, to a free woman, Rebecca, and a father who was formerly enslaved, Ezekiel Compton. We know that around the age of 17, he was an active agent on the Underground Railroad in central Pennsylvania. We know this because he helped two enslaved African-American brothers, George and John Butler, escape to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We know during the late 1850s, Jacob Compton became General Simon Cameron's carriage driver when Mr. Cameron lived at the John Harris Mansion on Front Street in Harrisburg. But now I'm going to fast forward to February 1861. While President Lincoln was on a whistle tour to his first inaugural, he planned to speak at the state capitol here in Harrisburg. However, on his way to the Jones Hotel on Market Street, Lincoln's Pinkerton guards discovered an assassination plot. Jacob Compton was immediately deputized to swiftly get President Lincoln safely out of Harrisburg to the Lincoln train. Because of his experience as a coachman and his service on the Underground Railroad, he knew all the back roads he had already earlier discovered. Jacob Compton later enlisted in the United States Colored Troops. And to even fast forward a little bit further, during the Harrisburg Grand Review Parade of the United States Colored Troops on November 14th, 1865, the USCT is what we call them, United States Colored Troops, assembled on the steps of the Bethel AME Church in the 8th Ward. And they marched orderly to Simon Cameron's house on Front Street, who was, of course, Jacob Compton's former employee. And Mr. Cameron formally mustered the USCT soldiers out of service. Now, we can go on and on about who Jacob Compton was. And as I said, I was going to just give you a snapshot. There was a whole lot of research done on this man. So, who was Jacob Compton? A man of distinction, and so much more.
Thank you for that, Kelly. Appreciate it. And such an interesting individual with such a rich and important history, and now finally properly memorialized in the Commonwealth Monument Project. Well, next, we'd like to welcome our very special guest of honor for today's program, and that is Mr. Paul Hibner, who is the Deputy Grand Master for the Prince Hall Masons of Pennsylvania. Mr. Hibner, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Pappenfuss. It's my privilege and honor to be here with you and with this great panel.
Thank you. We want to focus today on some of the many honors which Jacob Compton received as part of the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge. And I think to address that topic, we have Felix Gardenhire, who is the Grand Historian for the Lodge. Yeah. Could you speak to some of those honors?
Thank you, Mayor Pappenfuss. And for Jacob Compton, we wanted to just expound on him Masonically a little bit. He was our first worshipful master of his Masonic Lodge, Chosen Friends Lodge number 43 in 1865. It probably was just before they did the Grand Review in 1865, which he was a part of. He also moved to for his lodge. He actually, after he served as master for several years, he went on to become the lodge's secretary. And so he stayed active in his lodge. He went on to become a deputy grand master, a district deputy grand master of the Grand Lodge, which is the entire state of Pennsylvania. And he did that once he moved to the Wilkes-Barre area, and he had several counties in the northeast corner of the state, and he served as the deputy grand master in the Wilkes-Barre area of Pennsylvania. He stayed in Wilkes-Barre, I believe, for 10 years before moving back to Harrisburg. And we also have many men on the list, as we call it, Masonic Men of Majesty, and that's an entire list of some 27 men who have from several Harrisburg area lodges, which are Chosen Friends Lodge number 43, Paxton Lodge number 16. We have some lodges that have gone, that have closed down or when we call dormant, and they were Gary Lodge number 42 and Nehemiah Lodge number 16, which Paxton Lodge actually became and absorbed their membership.
Yeah, as a follow-up question to me, I'd be curious if you could talk a little bit about what Freemasonry may have meant to African Americans at this time in our history, and maybe even continuing up to the present day. I think when people think of Freemasonry, they may not recognize its rich history specifically in the African American community. Could you talk to that, Mr. Gardenhire?
We've started out our actual Freemasonry, or Prince Hall Freemasonry in Pennsylvania. Our first lodge in Pennsylvania started in 1797. And we were warranted by Prince Hall, who started African American Freemasonry in Massachusetts. And he was chartered under the Grand Lodge of England. So once we started here in Pennsylvania, we started in Philadelphia, and then we eventually spread west through Harrisburg. That Paxton Lodge number 16 was the first lodge outside of Philadelphia. And then we moved all the way to even Pittsburgh. And the first lodge west of the Alleghenies was St. Cyprian Lodge number 13. At the time. So, and then we went on to charter other lodges in other states. And once they formed 3 lodges, they could form a Grand Lodge, which is the governing body of the entire jurisdiction or state.
And what would Freemasonry as a fraternal organization have meant to African Americans in the 19th century?
Of course, 200 years ago, it meant taking care of their own communities. We had many men that were slaves or born into slavery, and they may have paid for their freedom or paid for their wives' freedom and their children's freedom. And so we started out basically uniting with other groups, particularly Quakers and other European groups that have come to America to flourish, and they had left Europe. And we formed with them to try to to get rid of slavery, really. And So we had a lot of abolitionist groups. We like to take care of our own community, bury our dead, take care of all of everyone in our small communities, but more so to aid and assist our slaves that were below the Mason-Dixon line. And of course, through that abolitionist movement, we had the Underground Railroad. We had several different men of who were at the forefront of that, and William Still, of course, Frederick Douglass worked with Martin Delany in Pittsburgh, and we had several people who did that. Beyond the Civil War, it became, I guess, that became the Reconstruction area, and then we had, Jim Crow, and then we had other civil rights issues all the way up to the present day.
And Mr. Mayor, perhaps Mr. Gardenhire can share with you about the benevolent societies and taking care of the elderly and the aging, and particularly their homes and civic and social organizations around Harrisburg and Dauphin County.
The other organizations we had the Odd Fellows, we had the Knights of Pythias, along with the Prince Hall Masons. We had many of in Philadelphia, when we first started out in the 1790s, we had the Free African Society started by Absalom Jones and Richard Allen. Absalom Jones went on to become our first Grand Master after we had at least 3 lodges that we can form a Grand Lodge. And so these were men of the cloth, as we would like to say, and they were rectors, and they went on to form, congregations and churches. Of course, you hear about Bethel AME in Harrisburg, and so we had a lot of different benevolent organizations, and that's what they were for. They were to form schools. They were to take care of the community, start maybe savings or insurance companies when you would have needed financial aid in your families, and the Masons provided a lot of that.
I was asking Felix about the Lingelstown home.
That's a little later in our history. That was really at the dawn of the 20th century. We actually formed, back then the term was, they call it senior facility now, or nursing home, but really it was an old folks home. They like to call it an old folks home. So we purchased 65 acres in 8 miles east of Harrisburg, and we sought to do that in 1907 or 1908, and several of the Masonic men of Majesty were the ones who instigated that and was able to buy that land from the Elmira Cemetery Company in Elmira, New York. And after we did that, we formed not only on that 65 acres, not only did we have real estate on there, which was the old folks home, but it also was a school for orphans. And the land itself was actually a farm, so that we could feed the residents of the home and the orphanage and the school. And so that happened, and we dedicated it in 1909. And the lodge in Harrisburg, all the members of that particular lodge, which you'll hear about us talk about almost all through this presentation, was Chosen Friends Lodge number 43, and several of the members of Paxton Lodge number 16, which is now in Steelton, Pennsylvania, just below Harrisburg. But at that time, they actually met at the Masonic home in Tanner's Alley.
Well, thank you for that history, Mr. Gardenhire. I understand that among the Prince Hall Masons, and specifically in the old 8th Ward, and commemorated as a part of the Commonwealth Monument Project, there were no fewer than 5 Grand Masters. Can you talk a little bit about some of these individuals?
Roll call would be Samuel Bennett is one, but of course he was the first Grand Master that is not on the monument. On the monument is actually Joseph L. Thomas, John W. Simpson, James W. Grant, John Paul Scott, and finally Percy C. Moore. And we actually have schools named after John Paul Scott, and we have lodges named after James W. Grant and Percy C. Moore.
Thank you. Well, we're going to go next to Robert Pierce Jr., who is a past master of Chosen Friends Lodge number 43. That was his great-grandfather's lodge. He is the great-grandson of John Paul Scott. And one of the great things about the monument is the way it connects the past to the present. So, Mr. Pierce, can you talk a little bit about some of the descendants of these men of Majesty?
I can talk a little bit, but more particularly about John Paul Scott, as I am a direct descendant of his. And, we talk about where the people at nowadays. Well, we have, or he has, many descendants that are spread across the United States. We go from California to Texas to Michigan to New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and even the Virgin Islands. But my generation would be the 4th generation from him and the 6th generation of Scots. And as a great grandson, my mother, who was a granddaughter, and her mother, Rebecca Scott, was the eldest of his children. And when you want to talk about what comes forth from a man of that distinction, his other daughter was Estella. She became a teacher of teachers. She not only taught students, she taught at Cheney State Teachers College. So she was a professor of other teachers, creating, again, a continuation of education for our people. Also, we had one of the first Black police officers was Billy Pierce. So we have a continuation of things. He always felt that the mind was something we need to continue to grow and continue to improve upon. So in the subsequent generations, we have many teachers, nurses, preachers that are still doing it now. We had 2 of his grandchildren that you may have heard of that were local activists, Shirley Pierce and Lorraine Peterson, who were instrumental in getting the Allison Hill Community Center built. And they spent many days and many hours down at the city council meetings to make sure things happened for Allison Hill. It was really interesting to hear that. When you mentioned their names, everybody listened. Also, you heard that there were schools named after John Paul Scott. We also had a church named after him. My mother and my father, who was the preacher, Robert Pierce Sr., they created the John Paul Scott. At that time, it was AME Zion Church. And since then, we've changed to AME John Paul Scott Community Church. And we always want to do a service to the community. His descendants remain active in the community from the 4th generation down to the 9th generation. Grands, great-grands, great-great-grands, and so on. They participate in programs like cancer survivors. We haven't done a march with those because we have cancer survivors. We also had issues with domestic violence, so we naturally support that. We had the Tears for Tarina. I'm sure you've seen that, you've heard of that, and they sponsor many things to raise money for people of domestic violence and keep that going. We also currently have a couple of preschools, again, trying to maintain the mind and the education of our youngsters. A couple of preschools that do pre-learning. There's one on Cameron Street, and that's again that's a 5th generation descendant that runs that one. We also have community outreach by a 5th generation Scotty Scott we call him, and he does community outreach with a lot of children, and he raises funds for that and keeps that program going, and he highlights that. He has a Facebook program that highlights what he does on a regular basis. You heard also about the different churches. Well, John Paul Scott was instrumental in getting Wesley Union AME Zion Church built on 2 of its original sites. He was one of the original purchasers of the deed. And I also remember that there was a picture of him and a huge number of Masons that did a cornerstone laying for that church, as they did for many other churches. And I remember when I first came into Masonry, I guess it was around 82, that they did a cornerstone laying at Macedonia Baptist Church. And at that time, that was the first time I really saw how many Masons were in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, because they were out in number. And many of you might also have remembered that Felix even mentioned that Wesley was part of the Underground Railroad. And there is, I believe, also a sign that attributes to that. And many of the descendants of John Paul Scott remain members of Wesley AME Zion Church and of our John Paul Scott Community Church. So we continue to try to stay active. We continue to strive to promote education because, as he said, knowledge is power. Knowledge allows you to continue to grow and continue to grow your community. And as we continue to do that, we continue to build our youth for things that are forthcoming. As we see, they can become not only council members, but they can become presidents of the United States. So we're looking forward to continue to do that, and whatever we can do to support the city and support our nation, we will continue to do that.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Pierce. And you mentioned a very important tradition there, the tradition of laying of cornerstones at public buildings. And I want to go back to Mr. Gardenhire and ask you if you could share some reflections on how the Masonic Lodge helped shape the architecture and the city, the architecture of Harrisburg and the region through this tradition of the laying of cornerstones.
Well, Masons always have traditionally laid cornerstones at churches and public institutions, churches and schools. Those are the 3 main ones that I always like to focus on because that's where we sort of like to always concentrate. And one of the most famous cornerstone layings, and I think there's a portrait in the Capitol of George Washington laying this cornerstone to the U.S. Capitol. And he's regaled in his Masonic regalia, and everyone assisting him with the cornerstone laying has their Masonic regalia on. So that's probably the most famous cornerstone laying that I can think of in American history. And that's a tradition that Masons always do. And it's always, the people's house or a public building or a church or a school. So that's what we do. And why we mention Chosen Friends, because Chosen Friends in the Harrisburg and central Pennsylvania area is really famous for laying cornerstones, mostly at churches, but they've done like YMCA and several other public buildings that, did cornerstone layings. And you start from your cornerstone laying, and then you build your building from that cornerstone. So, and sometimes they'll lay the cornerstone first, and then they'll build the building. And so that's what Masons, that's part of our ritualistic work and what we do as Masons.
Mr. Gardenhire, Could you tell the mayor where some of those cornerstones would be found in Harrisburg and Dauphin County today?
As Brother Scott had mentioned, like Wesley AME Zion, they've had several churches. So where the older church was located, maybe in the Tanner's Alley area, and then maybe where the new churches listed, that's where several of them in the Harrisburg area, mostly along 4th Street, State Street, several different churches, and all the churches of note through, I think we had a list from 1880s to about the 1980s, somewhere in there, about an 80 or 90 year range. And we had a list of all the cornerstone lanes that they had did, but it's mostly right out of the 8th Ward or just around in the vicinity of the 8th Ward in Harrisburg.
And Mr. Mayor, for you and for Channel 20 listeners, if I could quickly read this list, because I think some people come out of their church on Sunday morning not knowing their connection to that great tradition. Bethel AME Church in all 3 of its locations in Harrisburg, Wesley Union AME Zion Church, Monumental AME Church, Harris AME, Mount Calvary Baptist Church, Capitol Presbyterian Church, St. Paul Baptist Church, Goodwin Memorial Baptist Church, Mitchell Memorial Baptist Church, Camp Curtin YMCA, the Tabernacle Baptist Church, and Macedonia Baptist Church. So that's quite a spread of geography and quite a spread of congregations who experience, without knowing it, the impact and the legacy of the men of Majesty.
Yeah, thank you, Len. But it is an extraordinary list. It's a virtual documentation of all of Harrisburg's major churches and civic buildings throughout the past 100 years, and it is an extraordinary history and something that I'm glad we're able to shed some recognition on here through today's program. I want to also try and sort of bring us to the present day a bit, and I want to introduce Dr. Bernardo Michael of Messiah University to talk a little bit about, let's expand on this metaphor of the cornerstone. Just as the Masons were laying cornerstones throughout Harrisburg, Jacob Compton and these men of Majesty have really served as a cornerstone for the solidarity, vigilance, and endurance of the African American community in Harrisburg and central Pennsylvania. Can you talk a little bit about that, Dr. Michael?
Thank you. I'll be very happy to. I mean, I think the metaphor of cornerstones is a very appropriate one, and it echoes throughout the historical record at many, many levels. And I was just recently reminded by Mr. Felix Gardner himself, that sometime between 1891 and 1982, the Chosen Friends Lodge number 43 laid as many as 16 cornerstones for churches in Harrisburg and Steelton. So there is a cornerstones in the sense of a physical presence in the cityscape here. But I would like to broaden our sense of the term cornerstones by, in a much more broader sense, in their capacity to, organize socially. So the Masonic orders, as a fraternal, benevolent organization, became very active in the city, in the civic life of this city. And their social activism actually meant that they were very successful in creating a very dense network of connections and collaborations that actually bound and connected individuals and institutions across not just the state, but even across the country. So in this sense, Harrisburg's Black community was very aware of the creative capacities of the power of working together and thereby creating these dense networks of connections. So as a consequence of this, The Masonic orders, for instance, developed deep roots in the Black church. They organized fundraisers, they sponsored public petitions, and they championed educational endeavors. Last but not the least, with their regalia, made them a very distinctive presence at various public ceremonies and events. And again, to try to connect the idea of Cornerstones to the 8th Ward itself, and especially the Prince Hall Grand Lodge there, produced as many as 6 Grand Masters, which is a testimony to the remarkable leaderships that was produced in that neighborhood. And this itself was a distinctive cornerstone of the activism of these Black Masonic orders. Again, as active social agents, the men we've been talking about today were important members of their churches. They participated in local government and usually were staunch supporters of the Republican Party. They ran newspapers, hotels, restaurants, drugstores, barbershops, and even supported various sports and entertainment activities. Some were even active in the Underground Railroad and veterans of the Civil War. So their movements and activities have found frequent mention in the local newspapers. And I was looking through the State Journal, and it's in 1884, there was a very intriguing reference to our very own Jacob T. Compton, who apparently had a sunflower stalk that was 14 feet in height. So that apparently was such an important event, it found mention in the newspapers. Of course, the newspaper later on noted that someone else in the city had a sunflower stalk that was more than 14 feet in height. There is another aspect, and the final aspect about a cornerstone that has been really coming through as I've been perusing the historical material associated with this project. And this is the idea of a cornerstone that emphasizes the value of an education. And here the value of an education in the broadest sense of the term, and not just as something that is undertaken in a classroom or in a formal sort of way. So I think the sense here is that every individual had the capacity to be a cornerstone if they were willing to pursue an education. And Dr. William Howard Day actually was helping me think through this. And he was, as you know, one of Harrisburg's most prominent Black citizens and a very respected educator in the 19th century. And he knew that while many did not have access to formal education, the true power of education lay in the capacity of a human being to take the ideas of their time and weave them into their own thoughts. That is, one takes the ideas of one's context and weaves them into one's own life. And so much of this was very important and essential for the Black community, living as it was in an environment that was not very friendly, that was hostile to their existence. And in fact, every one of the individuals we have looked today have pursued such a vision of education as self-transformation. And in this sense, they've left a tremendous legacy for those who have come after them.
Thank you, Dr. Michael, for helping us recognize that legacy and those connections to the present day. And in that spirit, I want to return now to our guest of honor, again, Mr. Paul Hibner, the Deputy Grand Master of the Prince Hall Masons of Pennsylvania. And maybe we could just talk a little bit about the services that the Lodge currently provides to the community, and maybe some of the challenges that are currently facing the Lodge in Harrisburg, and what the community should know about the Lodge and potentially do to help.
Thank you, Mayor. The services that we have are just what have just been explained in our history. We are the connection, the information platform to getting to whatever agency you may need, the educational stumbling blocks. We've been known for helping to work through that, even on the racial side of our lives. The Masonic Lodge is not something that we believe or teach ourselves, that we brag or pat ourselves on the back. Our reward, we believe, is with our Creator. but we try to help people that are disenfranchised, those that have been abused, reaching back, pulling someone else up with you that needs your help. We've survived and have overcome deception. Some people think that, well, you guys are so secretive. Part of that secretive opinion came from those that will try to infiltrate us and deceive the order or the mission of Freemasonry. There are no secrets. We are just men that stand on our word and who are willing to help others in help, regardless of who they are. Connect the avenues, connect the ends for our community. So the message we need from our community to know is that we are here for you, whether it be guidance, advice, help get through the red tapes of society, and we have so much more work to do. But that's what we do as Masons.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm thinking to myself, as people are watching this program and they're learning about this rich history, they're going to be fascinated, and they're going to want to learn even more. And I want to turn now to Dr. David Pettigrew at Messiah University and just ask, basically, if people are watching, they want to learn more about these men of Majesty, they want to learn more about the Monument Project, the history of the old Eighth Ward, where should they turn?
Well, it's good to be with you all today. We have at Messiah University and amongst the Commonwealth Monument Project history detectives, and also with partners with Harrisburg University, we've collected quite a few resources related to the men that you've heard about today, the Masonic Men of Majesty, the Grand Masters, and also the broader neighborhoods, the context in which these people live. So I just want to make a couple of recommendations for places to go if you want to learn more. First and foremost, 100 Voices, Harrisburg's Historic African American Community, 1850 to 1920. We have a book. This book represents the work of over 30 different people, students at Messiah, but also descendants of men and women of the old Eighth Ward, and people whose names are listed on that Commonwealth Monument, the Commonwealth Monument. And in that book are 100 biographies, short little bios, short little snippets into the lives of these movers and shakers, these people who made such a difference in their world and had such an impact on their community. So I'll give you a glimpse of the book. Joseph L. Thomas, for example, you heard him mentioned. We have My Contributions, My Legacy, and About Me. And just to read you this great quote about Joseph L. Thomas, he said, this is from the Harrisburg Telegraph, May 20th, 1911. The praises of Frederick Douglass in the past and of Booker T. Washington in the present have been sounded again and oft for what have done in improving human conditions. They deserve all the laudations awarded to them, but do not forget that there are men in every community less known to fame than they, who unostentatiously are laboring in the same vineyard and doing the work the Master has given them to do. Harrisburg has had such workers, and one of the numbers is Joseph L. Thomas. So there are these little snippets, these glimpses of who these people were, people who made a difference. And this book is really designed to accompany the monument. So if you're looking at that monument, you're wondering who these names are, if you're wondering who James Grant was or John Scott, it'll give you a little glimpse, a quick glimpse of those people. If you want more, if you think this is a good start. Oh, by the way, the book is available for free download at the digital press of the University of North Dakota. They're the ones who publish the book. You can Google the digital press and 100 Voices, and you'll find the page that will allow you to download the work. You can also go to the Midtown Scholar Bookstore and purchase a physical copy of the book, and the purchase supports the Commonwealth Monument Maintenance Fund. So that's a very good thing. If you find that you want more information, you know, that this isn't enough, these glimpses aren't enough, go to the digitalharrisburg.com website. We have lots of different exhibits and exhibitions related to Harrisburg's Old Eighth Ward and the 100 men and women on the list, including many of the Grand Masters and the Masonic Men of Majesty that are under discussion today. We have primary sources, letters, obituaries, newspapers. And so if you go to the digitalharrisburg.com website and you look under the Commonwealth Monument Project, you'll see links to pages for each of these people. We have interactive maps of the Old Eighth Ward showing today versus the past. And in those maps, you can click onto arrows and points and actually see what the neighborhood looked like. You can see people, individuals in those shots as they were captured at the turn of the 20th century, just before the ward was demolished. We have primary sources. We have exhibitions and posters about the Old Eighth Ward. Look Up, Look Out is one of those sets of posters. And then we've got interviews with modern descendants and people who know something about the history of African-American history in Harrisburg. And I just want to mention one final little page. If you go under the About page of digitalharrisburg.com, you'll find the a list of publications, and some of those publications are free to download. They're recent articles about the Commonwealth Monument Project and also about the historic Old Eighth Ward. So there's lots to explore, and we invite you to come to the site or download the book or purchase a copy and just have fun learning about these people who were catalysts for change in their community.
Thank you, Dr. Pettigrew. I want to give my own personal endorsement to the 100 Voices book. It's a wonderful, wonderful collection, and the digitalharrisburg.com website is really one of the finest websites of its kind anywhere in the country. I encourage everybody to click on that website and learn more. We're running out of time a little bit with the program, and I think we need to go to our closing comments. I'm going to allow for closing comments from a number of the individuals we've heard from, and we'll go first to Mr. Hibner. Mr. Hibner, what is your takeaway from today's program?
Thank you, Mayor Pappenfuss. I think it's been an excellent interview, sharing of knowledge and experiences that most of us did not even know. I'm more humbled by the history of my fraternity as a Freemason, saddened by the fact that a lot of things could not have been publicized as it was happening in the past. But as things have progressed, we can now talk about them more openly and see how we got where we are. It's our privilege to be here. Our grand historian, Felix Gardenshire, is just an outstanding person. Brother Robert E. Pierce is an orator of his own, in his own right. To those on this panel, I want to say thank you for sharing life with us, and it will not go unnoticed. Thank you, Mayor Pappenfuss.
Thank you. And Mr. Gardenshire, I understand that there may be a history as well of your organization. Do you have a plug you'd like to make for that particular book?
Yes, we have our, and I'll show you a copy of the book. It is our 200th commemorative anniversary of the history of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge. What we did was compile this. It goes from 1815 when we first became a Grand Lodge, and it goes through 2015, and we published it in 2016. And it tells the 200-year history of our Grand Lodge, our individual lodges, our Grand Masters, starting with Absalom Jones and ending with the Grand Master who served in the year 2015. So That is our history book, and it is available through our Grand Lodge, or Linwood Sloan would know how to contact us if anyone would like to purchase a copy. We don't have it online where you can purchase it at Amazon or anywhere like that, but you can get it directly from our Prince Hall Grand Lodge.
And Mr. Mayor, this is a beautiful book of incredible photographs. The Commonwealth Monument Project did not want the cost of the book to be prohibitive to the immersion in the history. And so through our education program, we have purchased 5 copies of this book, which we have placed in the state library, the state archives, the Dauphin County Library, and the Dauphin County Historical Society. So that if listeners want to research in any of the archival collections their history, they can go and find this book access to the public.
That's wonderful, and reminds me that pretty soon we're going to have a new state archives here in Harrisburg on 6th Street. We're very pleased to be currently working with them to transfer a lot of Harrisburg's historical documents and records, and there will be a reading room where scholars can not only read that book, but research and find more about Harrisburg's past, and we're proud of that partnership. Dr. Michael, let's go to you and talk about some more takeaways from today's show. What are your takeaways?
Thank you. The historical research that we've been undertaking has been fascinating in the sense of trying to draw connections and connect the dots between various individuals we've studied and represented in the 100 Voices, the physical space some of them occupied in the city, especially the neighborhood of the 8th Ward, and then the larger canvas of the history of our region and the nation itself. And, going through, there are lots of quotes too that kind of mention and refer to the 8th Ward as being a very prominent, can I use the word again, cornerstone in all of this. J. Howard Wirth, who was an early 20th century chronicler, kind of noted that the 8th Ward had become a haven of refuge. And for many who were fleeing slavery in the South. A newspaper article written in 1885 said that the 8th Ward was a stronghold. And all of this is part of this idea of legacy, that this stronghold actually produced a tremendous level of social energy. And some of the energy for this kind of activism has connections and ties to anti-slavery, anti-segregation activism going on in the country and in our region. And so that is an important piece to tie in, a thread to tie in into our understanding of the Masonic orders and the context in which they were working. And this was very key and critical for the Black community in general, which had to remain very resilient in the face of the daily dangers of living in fear under constant surveillance in a segregated, hostile, and even a very dangerous world. And so the story of the 8th Ward and these individuals and their fraternal organizations is a long story of struggle, persistence, and resilience in the midst of tragedy and triumph. Another kind of metaphor that keeps coming into my mind based on all the historical readings and writings and conversations we've been having within our group and beyond is the sense that this history of activism and connectivity and interconnections was probably far broader and deeper than we have previously admitted. And many ordinary people participated in the flow of these energies. And the imagery that comes to my mind very frequently is that of a honeycomb structure. If you can imagine a beehive, constant activism and community building that successfully withstood the force of an unequal world and its powers. And the lattice work of this honeycomb structure has a long and rich and a very varied history. And we are beginning to discern its outlines and include it in our local and regional histories. And hopefully, possibly, ultimately, in the national portrait of the United States as well. There are so many local and regional organizations at work that are building off these energies right here in Pennsylvania. such as the Commonwealth Monument Project. This program is part of all of that. The Crispus Attucks, the Francis Project, the Henry Highland Garnet Society, the Sons of Goodwill, the White Carnation Society, and national organizations and movements like the YWCA, and more contemporary social movements such as the Black Lives Matter, have all drawn from this long-standing tradition of self-help that can be traced back to slavery and segregation. And we here in Harrisburg and South Central Pennsylvania are very much part of that story.
Wonderful. And Lenwood Sloan, to you for the final word.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I have two quick final things to say. First, thank you for your continuing support of bringing the presence of the past into the blueprint for the future. You know, the 1850 Fugitive Slave Office was at 3rd and Walnut Street, just one block from the gateway to the old 8th Ward, Tanner's Alley. And every morning, bounty hunters would go into the old 8th Ward and they would put up signs saying wanted. So we have been working with Messiah University to appropriate that wanted sign. We are putting up both physical and social media wanted signs saying wanted, the descendants of the old 8th Ward. Please go to digitalharrisburg.com. First, visit the monument. Secondly, find your family's name there. Then dig into your basement, under your bed, in your closet, in your attic, and find those things that you consider to be relics, but we consider to be pieces of a puzzle. And then plug your story in. You own this. This is your legacy. So we're inviting all the listeners of this station to connect with the pictures on their walls, the things in their Bibles, connect to this history, come home. Mr. Mayor, I thank you for our first vision, which was a grand jubilee, where we would bring all the descendants of the old 8th Ward back home to Harrisburg. Well, COVID set that aside for now, but it doesn't mean that we can't have a digital jubilee. It doesn't mean that we can't have a social media homecoming where you connect to that history. So my takeaway is the title of this program. I'm asked, Mr. Mayor, finally, constantly, why are you making so much of these 100 men? They were garbage men. They were drugstore owners. They were barbershop owners. Well, that may have been the way they supported their families by day, but in reality, they were men of majesty. They were grand masters of their destiny. They were architects and change agents for their community. And so our goal in this program is to lift them up and to place them on a pedestal and a spotlight. And we really thank you and Channel 20 for allowing us to reach out to the community and share this story.
And thank you, Lenwood. And we will continue to tell these stories. We can't tell them enough. The Commonwealth Monument Project is beautiful and will stand the test of time and will be a gathering place for generations to come. Thanks to all the guests for being a part of this program today. I hope those watching learned a lot, and we'll continue to research and learn more about our varied and diverse and incredibly important history here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Thanks for watching.